It is often said that success has many parents and failure is an orphan. Today's guest has many superpowers. I'm talking about none other than James Scongack, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of Bruce Power, but he is so much more than that, wears so many hats. A driving force behind the Green Ribbon panel, a driving force and current chair of the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, driver behind the creation of the Nuclear Innovation Institute, and so much more. From a personal standpoint, one of the things I'm most proud of and thankful for his work is as chair of POGO, the Pediatric Oncology Group of Ontario. He's always making a big difference wherever he goes. Thanks for joining us today, James.
Very well. Thanks, Rocco. And right back at you. You and I have known each other for a number of years, but, I always remember our time together during the pandemic when you were the president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and all the work that we did during that really tough time, bringing the business community in Ontario together to make a difference. So, I follow your example, and I'm looking forward to our chat today.
Awesome. I told you he's that way. Look, I want to talk about the Green Ribbon panel today, and really 4 key themes and a sub-theme. The 4 key themes being the importance of collaboration. This is an incredibly diverse group of people that you brought together. There's a reason for that. There's a power behind that. I want to explore that. I want to look at the theme that's on everyone's lips across the globe now, which is energy security. I want to look at what building a great energy foundation means from the standpoint of economic resilience for our province, for our country, for all of the communities that are touched by the initiatives that we're talking about. And finally, looking at creating a clean energy future that we all aspire to. And the sub-theme within resilience is really, because of what we're doing on the nuclear energy front in Canada, we have the ability through medical isotopes to save literally thousands of lives around the world. And I think that's something worth digging into. But first off, on the collaboration front, why, when so many people in business want to, get to the answer immediately and not have too many meetings, would you set up a panel with incredibly diverse backgrounds from labor, from business, from First Nations, from advocacy groups, and the general public?
Yeah, well, Rocco, I sort of, it's sort of culturally anchored in me in terms of the DNA of Bruce Power. And what I often say at Bruce Power, world's largest nuclear facility, large infrastructure project, 8 reactors, medical isotopes, electricity, all the above. A lot of people look at Bruce Power and think, and often say, that's a real technical business. And they're right, it is a technical business. But I always say we're in the people business. And when I think of our organization at Bruce Power, getting the right cross-functional group of people together, putting them in a room, I can guarantee you 10 times out of 10, they will move the dial and solve problems. And so that's sort of in my DNA, and that's how we operate as a site. We're in a small community, very close-knit family. And so then to answer your question specifically, when I think about the challenges and opportunities Canada and Ontario has, it's just very obvious to me that we can't go forward with solutions unless we brought everybody together. Because I think one of the, it's very easy to be critical of our policymakers. We see that in the newspaper all the time, and that's a democracy. So part of that is okay. But I also think it's incumbent upon us to bring together all of those facets that you're talking about when we're putting policy advice forward. Because if we want things to move quickly, we need to be unified. And so for me, it's really just a way we've grown up at Bruce Power doing business. And I think the more we as Canadians and Ontarians, when we're approaching challenges and opportunities, we can take an approach where we're bringing people together. So when we put policy advice forward, it has the support of everybody to begin with. It really supports our policymakers in the speed that we're looking for.
Let's tug on that thread of speed. And clearly, with the rapid growth of electrification and desire for more electrification, with initiatives like electric arc furnaces in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie for our steel industry to bring down GHG, be more competitive on a global basis, with the rise of AI data centers that gobble up huge amounts of power. And in a world where we've seen from a geopolitical standpoint, if you're not master of your own domain in terms of energy, you're at risk. What about the theme of energy security and what's important in that and the role that nuclear can play?
Yeah, you're bang on, Rocco, and it's we've really had a convergence of global events that has really changed our perspective on this. First, it was in recent years anyway. First was COVID-19 in terms of supply chain, the vulnerabilities of supply chains becoming clear to people, and why people wanted to have stronger domestic supply chains. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in terms of energy security as an example. So we've had, and I could go on and on. You talked about the growth of AI data centers. We've had a lot of external events that have really, I think, focused people on energy security is critical for economic security and national security. And so when I think of whether it's the role of nuclear, whether it's the role of large hydro, role of natural gas, role of renewables, for me, it's all about having that energy security. And when you have that energy security, and ideally an energy sector that the supply chain domestically fully supports that, so the benefits go domestic to create good made in Canada jobs. But when you have that energy security, you have that economic security, where your economy is not going to be limited by growth based on electricity. I think what we're going to see is the growth of data centers is going to be, and there's a big discussion on sovereign AI right now. It's not going to be limited by the ability to build data centers. It's going to be limited by the supply of electricity to power those data centers. Also, when we think about national security, being energy independent, being energy secure, as a, I think the Canadian flag flies pretty well around the world. We as Canadians want to be the source of that reliable energy, that when people look to importing electricity, whether it's our neighbors to the south in the US, whether it's the export of natural gas, export of medical isotopes, that Canada is seen as that trusted partner. So I think it's also about stabilizing a world and making sure that that we are advancing that freedom and democracy through made in Canada energy.
Right. The Prime Minister is very fond of repeating that he wants to, together with everyone in our society, build Canada into the strongest economy in the G7, the fastest growing. To do that, obviously, we're going to need an incredible foundation of affordable, reliable power to meet those growing needs. But the impact is not simply just the power to use in other purposes. It's also the incredible impact that building out that energy foundation and having great employers like yourselves at Bruce and OPG have in the communities in which you're working, and what that does for economic resilience in our communities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe I'll look at it through a personal lens. So I grew up in Port Elgin, Ontario. And I think of the great community I live in, the great career that I've been, very honored to have. A lot of that opportunity that me and my family and people who live in the community that I grew up in, they have that lifestyle today because of decisions that were made in the 1970s and 80s around building infrastructure. So not only did that infrastructure create jobs to build, but that infrastructure created sustained jobs and had a contribution to Ontario for decades and decades and decades. So when we talk about building the largest economy in the G7, I think it's also about building a sustainable economy. It's about building that, people say, really talk about Canada as an energy superpower, which I think we are. But a lot of what our energy superpower drivers were put in place decades ago. And so we need to have that multi-generational view. I mean, I always say that whether it's a subway, a nuclear plant, a highway. I mean, you've been advocates of those kind of projects, Rocco. Once those projects are in service, nobody ever regrets building them. But it takes that kind of bold leadership with the long-term view. But I think most importantly, how we build those projects is really important. So there's clearly that community benefit. We want made in Canada, made in Ontario supply chains. But I also think how we do projects going forward around getting Indigenous and First Nation community engagement in those, equity participation, addressing concerns of First Nations community who have a unique connection to the land and the environment with a 7 generations view. So, I think there's an opportunity to do these things better. But I think we have a very strong foundation to build on. And I think we really need to keep that long-term view in mind.
Well, I want to tug on those two themes as well. First off is, how you do the building. Part of the Bruce Power DNA has also been to ensure that you build out a supply chain that's local, that's here in Ontario, that's here in Canada. And I've heard you in numerous occasions speak very proudly and appropriately so to the fact that through this multi-billion-dollar refurbishment that you've been doing at Bruce, that over 95 cents of every dollar has been spent right here in Ontario and in Canada. And tell me a little bit about how that's possible and what the impact that is on local economies across the province.
Yeah, that's right. And you're former president of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. So, you know how better than anybody, Rocco, how important it is for businesses of all sizes and communities across Ontario. And we always need to keep in mind that small businesses are the heart of our economy here in Ontario. I mean, larger corporate organizations like Bruce Power get a lot of attention, but the driver of our economy in Ontario is small business. And so the more dollars we can keep here in Ontario means more goods and services are made in Ontario. Small and medium-sized businesses providing services to those. So it keeps that money in our economy. You can take whatever multiplier, there's a range of views out there, but the simplest multiplier is that for every dollar we spend, there's $2 to $2.50 of benefit in the economy. We want to keep that local. We want everything from our grocery stores to our hardware stores to our large manufacturers, having Canadians and Ontarians working in that. So it's really about making sure our money stays home. And we as Canadians are really good at areas like natural resources and exporting material, but sometimes we can lose sight of the value chain that comes with that. We talked about isotopes in the past. We need to do more of that here in Canada. And so it's all about keeping the spend locally and being intentional about that. You'll remember during COVID, what did we always say during COVID? We said, we're going to buy local. And a lot of people did a really good job of that. And they said, we'll never go back. Well, we have gone back to some of those, and making that intentional investment here. Again, it's not just about big companies, it's about small businesses and entrepreneurs. So we as Canadians need to keep our money at home as much as possible.
But I would add, in addition to clearly the economic benefit of spending at home, one of the things that both you and OPG with the Darlington refurbishment have shown is by having that local strong supply chain, you're able to deliver on budget and on time. That may not be the case if you're not controlling or not have line of sight to your supply chain.
Yeah, that's right. And you're bang on, whether you look at the Bruce refurbishment program or OPG, where we've collaborated incredibly well, really as one team Ontario. I sort of go back to my opening comment about we are in the people business. And so if you're in the people business, it's about people working together. It's about them being local. It's about them being at the same rink with each other, the same care for their community, the same care for the province. And that people component, I don't think you can underestimate. Why are these projects successful? I can give you a million kind of corporate reasons, but the top reason is we got the right people working together and they care about the outcome. And when you have that local focus, I think it's an incredibly, it drives collaboration, but it also drives passion.
Part of that local focus, part of that inclusion of community so that we have not just a sustainable economy, but an inclusive one, has been the work that you and the nuclear industry as a whole have been doing with our First Nations. Can you give us you spoke in general terms about it, but can you give us some specific examples of where, for instance, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation are actual partners with you in different initiatives?
It's a good question, Rocco, and I would really break it up into two pieces. So, firstly, in terms of what we're focused on today, you're right. We've been able to partner with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation on the production of life-saving medical isotopes at our site through a joint partnership called Gamuzabingamizapon. I think I pronounced that.
Say that
Twice. My friends at the SON will correct my Ojibwe, but it's been a joint initiative where we're investing in making life-saving medical isotopes, and it's something that will create economic opportunity in the community, but it's also something we're proud of together, and I'm really proud of that. I think the piece I'm also very realistic about is the fact that historically, if I go back 50, 60 years, we didn't do things right 50, 60 years ago. We've learned a lot. And so it's incumbent upon us to recognize that history, as challenging, as difficult as it can be at times, and emotional, and use that knowledge about informing what we're going to do different the next 50 years. So I think it's also about having the humility that this is not about a one and done initiative. It's something we have to work at together. And partnership means partnership. It doesn't mean that you agree on everything every day. It means that you're forming a partnership. And so to me, the core of partnership is trust. And that's what we're focused on. Trust is fragile. It takes a long time to build. And we're just going to keep working as hard as we can to build that trust.
In addition to that equity partnership, I've also visited where you've set up training facilities to help First Nations youth really explore opportunities and careers and get ready for great high-paying jobs in the industry.
Absolutely. The fastest growing segment of our population here in Ontario is First Nations youth.
And really the only growing, aside from immigration, is that.
Absolutely. And so if we want talk about that amazing workforce we need to advance our future, First Nations young people is just a great opportunity for us. I also believe it's an opportunity for First Nations young people as well. But, we've really worked hard to advance that important partnership with First Nations communities. And I can tell you, we're so proud of all the First Nations peoples and youth that have joined our organization, have joined the supply chain. They bring a tremendous amount of energy, but also as we're focused on reconciliation, we learn from that. They share with us their experiences. They share with us their teachings and the history. And so it's a very special relationship, but one I believe is a massive opportunity in terms of these amazing youth and bringing them into our industry.
Well, I would argue that you guys are masters at reconciliation and not just reconciliation. Since we're on the theme of isotopes, and I know this is something near and dear to your heart, look, the reality is we often talk about world-class this and world-class that within Canada. And the reality is you can only be world-class in a few things. And clearly medical isotopes is one where we punch way above our weight globally, and where we have aspiration to do even more, both through the utilities players, your supply chain, and governments at all levels. Tell us a little bit about Isotopes for Hope and what Canada is doing and how it's seen in the global community when it comes to life-saving isotopes.
Yeah, it's a good question, Rocco. And if we just think about it from a personal perspective, we always say that 40% of people will get cancer in their lives, but 100% of us will be impacted by cancer, whether it's ourselves, our friends, our loved ones, our colleagues. And when in the modern healthcare system, which we're fortunate to have here in Canada, does it have challenges? Yes, but it is a world-renowned healthcare system, especially when it comes to cancer care. An important tool in the toolbox that healthcare professionals use to diagnose and treat cancer is the use of medical isotopes. And so as more people around the world ideally have more access to modern cancer treatments, the energy of those cancer treatments is medical isotopes, just like the energy to turn the light on in here is electricity. The energy in these cancer treatments is medical isotopes. So,
or even to diagnose them in the first place.
Absolutely, diagnose and treat or sterilize medical equipment. So Canada has a unique capability, a fleet of CANDU reactors that through the refurbishment program you talked about earlier are going to operate to the 2060s and 2070s and beyond. We have a cyclotron network, and we also have an amazing research network of amazing institutions. And so Canada is a dominant player in this space. And when I look at that demand for medical isotopes, there's no other country in the world that has the secret sauce that we have here in Canada. And so this is really about Canada not only recognize the opportunity, but recognizing the responsibility to assert this, because patients are counting on us. And so, when I think of the things that make me proud to be a Canadian, there's so many we could spend all day, but I think of our historic role in peacekeeping. I think of the role that we play around the world in so many ways. I stack medical isotopes up with that. And I think the world is counting on Canada in this space, and it's something we need to continue to double down on and be very assertive about as Canadians, because unless we are pushing this forward, the world is not going to have the isotopes we need. And ultimately, it's patients who suffer.
Well, I have a lot of heart for this because, as you know, one of my earlier incarnations was as CEO of Prostate Cancer Canada. So I've talked to patients, I've talked to families, and not to get too wonkish, but one of the things in that special sauce for Canada is the fact that because our major nuclear fleet is CANDU technology, we're in a position through the great innovation that you guys have done with your partners to be able to harvest medical isotopes at scale.
Absolutely.
In a commercial reactor. Because most of the rest of the world is using small research reactors to do that. And that means you simply can't offer affordable mass volume of this life-saving technology. And you guys are giving those patients and their families incredible hope, and definitely deserve a big bow on that.
Well, no, and we're really proud of it. Our friends at Ontario Power Generation are doing the same with their fleet. And I think you hit the nail on the head that when we think about electricity supply, what we want to do is have many reactors. So if a reactor is down on planned maintenance or a reactor is down on refurbishment, there's enough other capacity to provide electricity. It's a commercial power reactor. To your point, we're using those reactors now for isotopes, so we have that redundancy and scale. And our goal as Canadians is really focused on making sure that supply security is not an issue.
Right.
I remember when people from the Ukraine were sending me emails during Russia's invasion of Ukraine saying they were cut off isotopes from Russia. Health access to cancer treatment should not be a geopolitical weapon. And that's to your point, we as Canadians have not only an opportunity, but a responsibility there.
Growing up as I did in Toronto, summers were a time when you could pretty much expect multiple smog days. And then Ontario took the enormous step, probably the single greatest reduction in GHG emissions in North America to that point, in shutting down coal and basically giving us smog-free days. That would not have been possible without the additional capacity coming from Bruce and from a further refurbishment in the nuclear fleet. And interestingly, a lot of the hesitation around nuclear has often come from the environmental sector that's worried about it for a variety of reasons. And now we have this moment where a growing percentage of even the environmental community, and I had the great opportunity to speak to our friends at Pollution Probe,
right,
see that from a pragmatic standpoint, there is no path to a zero emission future without nuclear playing a role. How do we get that message out, and what more are we doing to assist in bringing that future forward?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Rocco. And, I remember those days as you do. I mean, a typical summer, there would be 50 smog days in Southern Ontario. We're basically at zero now, unless, if you take the wildfire.
Right, yeah.
Right. So, and we know that was from shutting down coal plants. We also know numerically that 70% of the electricity needed to phase out coal came from Bruce Power, and the remaining 20 came from OPG. So 90%. So you're spot on. I mean, I'm an environmentalist. It's actually what got me into the nuclear power industry. I mean, clearly I'm from the community, but I believe that nuclear isn't just, we have to deal with it. We have to take. I actually believe nuclear is an energy source to be really proud of, as I know you do. And so the first thing I think we need to do is be assertive about what we do, but also be humble about the gaps our technology has, like every technology has, and be very honest and transparent about what we're doing to manage those. Because no energy source has 100% pluses.
Right.
We manage and pay for all of our waste. We safely operate our facilities. We should talk very openly about those things. We don't need to be apologetic for it. And when I look at Ontario, I mean, we get monthly public opinion polling. I know you love polls too, but we consistently every month in Ontario see between 80 to 85% of Ontarians support the continued operation of our nuclear facilities. Politics better than I do, but you'd take 85% for any office, anytime, anywhere. So now we're going to work as hard as we can to get that remaining 15%, but there's never 100% consensus. But I think there's that ambition and that pride, but also that humility. And, I always say that we shouldn't idolize or demonize any energy source. If there was one energy source that could meet all of our needs and meet all of our checkboxes, we wouldn't have this debate.
Right.
But energy policy is about a mix. And I don't think nuclear can be 100% of the mix, but here in Ontario, I think we're very clearly 50 to 60%. So I think it's about being balanced and not getting into this, putting other forms of energy down, talking about the pros and cons and how do you get the right mix.
Well, to that end, the federal government recently tabled a budget. Some of the initiatives and recommendations of the Green Ribbon panel appear in that. You also have the opening of the Major Projects Office, and in the first suite of 5, including the SMR projects at Darlington. Nuclear seems to be having a moment where politics is seeing the importance of where that consensus has gotten to. What are the key kind of next steps in your mind to moving that along?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about the moment we're in. Over the last month, we've had the fall economic statement here in the province of Ontario and the budget you noted by the government of Canada. And what I would say is when it comes to nuclear, there's very good alignment between those two. And that's so important to have our federal and provincial government aligned on those areas. And some of the recommendations we made, we saw action in both there. So that's really important. Next steps for me is really about, we've seen the policy direction that's been set federally. We've seen the budget introduced. The budget needs to get passed and finalized. And in areas like investment tax credits that have really been in motion for 3 years, we need to get them done and get them moving. Because the only thing worse than not having an investment tax credit is a tax credit that isn't flowing. Right? And what's really important is we know affordability is a big issue for families and businesses in not only Ontario and Canada, but around the world. What's really key about the investment tax credits that have been put in place is they flow, in the case of Bruce Power, right back to the ratepayer. So they stimulate investment on the one hand, but they flow back to the consumer. Because as we're building this infrastructure, we also need to take measures to not only get the private sector investment, but also make sure that our families and businesses have an affordable form of electricity. And so I think getting those flowing is going to be really important. What I always say is that sometimes we can fall into a cultural trap, for lack of a better term, of the process being the product. We can announce things, but executing on them is really going to be our focus. So, and I know the government of Canada has put a real focus on execution, and we're going to certainly help provide that unified advice on what that execution looks like. Because, oftentimes governments are large organizations, and there'll be people at the senior levels in government who believe things are flowing and they're not. And that's something we can work together on.
Right. And you've earned that seat at the table by delivering multi-billion-dollar projects on time, on budget, which should give the government incredible confidence.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the nuclear industry, we need to prove ourselves every day.
Right.
And credibility is something that takes a long time to earn, but not a lot to lose unless so maintaining that. It's also investors. In the case of Bruce Power, this is all private capital. So, if we say we're going to do something safely with quality, on time, and on budget, we're held to that. And I think that level of accountability is healthy, but we just need to keep earning our stripes.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people talk about Canada and Ontario becoming an energy superpower. You've always reminded me that we are an energy superpower. I have a dear friend who's a DC comic fan, and he points out that, look, Superman came with superpowers from Krypton, but his Earth father wanted him to hide them and not expose them to the world because he was afraid of what would happen. So having superpowers is one thing. What you do to become a superhero is another. In your mind, what are the 2 or 3 things that we need to be doing to play the role of superhero?
Yeah, I personally, I love the analogy, and very typical Canadian. We don't like to sometimes talk about our successes. That humility is good, but sometimes it also,
a Canadian did the Superman.
Well, better. So, I would say there's 3 main areas that we remain focused on. The first is to firstly be very assertive on the global stage about what capabilities we have here and how Ontario, all of the capabilities we talked about, supply chain being spent locally, all of those capabilities that support our plants here in Ontario, whether you're building a nuclear plant in Europe or the United States, you want to come to Ontario to buy the best high quality components for your nuclear plant. Yeah. So all the things that support our plants here can support plants elsewhere. I think that's number one. I think the second area is being very bold from the perspective of talking about an energy mix. You really want Canada to be that first line on the ice in a hockey game. Whether it's our oil and gas sector out west, whether it's our hydroelectric fleet, our transmission. We have an energy network, and it's got to be Team Canada. It can't be everybody off solo. How are we Team Canada? We got to lift everybody up, and I think that's really important. And the third piece, and it ties in, Rocco, with what you were sort of scratching at in the last question, which is you only have credibility if you do things. So when we say we're going to do something, we have to do it. And sometimes we'll try things and we'll have challenges and we'll learn from those challenges. But I really think Canada delivering on what we say we're going to do, just like we did in the refurb program, and credit goes to our workers and our vendor partners and our building trade unions. They went and did what they said they would do. And I think being that trusted partner as Canadians and Ontarians, that when we say we're going to do something, you can count on us to do it. Because when it comes to energy, people are counting on us. One of my former bosses once told me that reputation is the highest prize. And the reason why reputation is the highest prize is because other people give you a reputation. You don't give yourself a reputation. And so I think we need to think about our leadership role as reputation. And if we have that reputation, people are going to come to us. We're going to be able to provide the energy the world needs and create a lot of opportunities for Canadians.
Well, and the corollary to reputation is that business travels at the speed of trust.
Absolutely.
And quite frankly, there are a lot of people in the world that trust Canada, and we can continue to build on that.
That's right.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks, my friend. Always
appreciate it.